I'm Vice Chairman of the Department of Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. It's an awesome responsibility and assignment. We end up dealing with over 50% of the discretionary domestic spending each year in the United States. I work with my chairman, Senator Shelby. I've worked with others in the past, trying to keep up with a changing environment in the world and a changing agenda in Washington. Many of the briefings which I receive are open and public, but many are also classified. Last week I met with the top United States commander in Europe, General Todd Walters. General Walters provided for me and Senator Shelby a classified briefing on the Trump administration's plans to remove almost 12,000 American troops from Germany. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, made a similar briefing, but publicly, to the press. I'm extremely concerned by both the classified and unclassified information I've been given about this plan, and by the differences in the briefing I received compared to the public announcements from the Secretary of Defense yesterday. Let me start off by saying this plan makes no sense. While some are framing this as an improvement of our military posture in Europe, I don't buy it. Nobody else should either. Germany now spends 1.3% of its gross domestic product on defense. Along with the majority of NATO members, Germany has agreed to reach a goal of 2% of GDP on defense. Germany ought to make good on its word, that's for sure. But to be clear, many, including President Trump, fail to appreciate that there is much more to NATO's importance than simply meeting a spending goal. In fact, there are many important ways to evaluate this historic NATO alliance and judge the commitment of each member, including the political will of its leaders, its shared vision and values, and the interoperability of our military through regular training. All of these things add to NATO's deterrence. But President Trump is clearly just using this argument about the percentage contribution and insufficient spending to drive a petty and personal grudge against Germany. How do we know this? Because, listen to this, the countries that would be receiving our troops transferred out of Germany also do not meet the 2% goal. President Trump was reportedly angry that German Chancellor Merkel declined an invitation for an in-person G7 summit in the U.S. in the middle of this global pandemic. Think of that. She was worried about the health consequences of such a meeting. We are canceling gatherings right and left in America because of a genuine concern we have for the well-being of one another. Chancellor Merkel's position is hardly unreasonable. It makes sense. Many of the statements and evidence of conduct from the president do not. And amidst this snub to our NATO ally, President Trump continues to try to bring President Putin and Congress into the G7. Even after reports about Russian bounties being put on American soldiers in Afghanistan and the president's failure time and again since this has been disclosed to raise the issue with Vladimir Putin. During the briefing last week, I understood there would be a deliberative process for planning how these troops would be moved and when they would be moved. We would discuss the infrastructure that needs to be built in the United States as well as in Europe. And we'd be in close consultation with our allies in the process. In contrast, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hyten, stated yesterday there's a planning process occurring, but also he went on to say, we'll start moving right away, with forces moving right away. Really? Without the planning? It sounds like this general is snapping to the attention of a president who is determined to poke the German chancellor in the eye. Shouldn't our highest priority be the defense of America rather than a spite match? If I'm confused about how quickly this plan has unfolded, I'll bet the rest of our NATO allies are as well. I might also say that I received a preliminary cost estimate on how much American taxpayers will have to pay for this political adventure by President Trump. This figure is still classified. I'm sorry that it is, but I can assure you the costs are substantial. Secretary Esper was dismissive yesterday of this cost. He should not be. It is substantial. Hiding the costs of troop realignment plans brings to mind the president's campaign promise that Mexico was going to pay for our border wall. In reality, the Department of Defense paid for a large part of it because the president diverted funds appropriated for our national defense to this Captain Queeg venture of his on our southern border. The Defense Department should make cost estimates of this plan public today. Let the American people know what the president expects us to spend in order for him to get the last word with Angela Merkel. The American people ought to decide for themselves whether this is a cost worth bearing. And let me tell you what's been conspicuously absent from both public and private briefings, and that's whether our commitment to our real allies in Europe, in NATO, is really designed to address the front line of potential Russian aggression and provocation. I know what that front line is, and most people do as well. The Baltics and Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland. Here are 4 countries who have the most to lose if Putin chooses a path to war. Each of them meets and exceeds the spending goals for NATO. But this plan for the reallocation and reassignment of U.S. troops does not help these 4 countries. I went through the briefing. Those 4 countries weren't raised in the briefing. I raised them in a question afterwards. Why are these countries being overlooked if we're moving troops to make Europe safer? Instead, the Department of Defense yesterday threw in as an aside a vague assurance, maybe just a possibility, that sometime maybe in the future, more American troops might rotate through those countries for short periods of time. And major parts of the plan that I saw, and was a part of the plan that was released yesterday, actually move American troops and NATO allies further away from Russia. Well, Vladimir Putin's getting the last laugh again when it comes to this president. Vladimir Putin fears a united NATO. Sadly, President Trump has done everything he can to divide and diminish that NATO alliance. President Putin believes that as long as that NATO alliance is divided, he's in a stronger bargaining position. Sadly, he's right. NATO is the most successful alliance in American history. Instead of strengthening it, the President of the United States is weakening it. Instead of leading, he is undermining. The best way to reassure our allies that we are with them is to scrap this plan now. If this administration is so confident about how good an idea this is, tell the American people how much it's going to cost and explain why we're not reallocating our forces in Europe to the real front line in Poland and the Baltics. Instead of pulling back our troops, we should be withdrawing this half-baked plan and start over anew with a focus on stopping aggression from Vladimir Putin and standing behind our traditional allies. Mr. President, I yield the floor.